everyone, and welcome to another episode of Scary Stories We Tell. I am your host, Chris Dashew, and I am joined by a newcomer to this show, but not a newcomer to podcasting with me, at least, and not a newcomer to podcasting in general. He is a film professor at Northwestern and a filmmaker. You have heard him on the Culture Cast before, but you're hearing him here now. Your friend and mine, Spencer Parsons.
Hello. I'm glad to be in the scary place this time.
You ready to talk about some fucked up shit?
This movie's so fucked. Oh,
yo, it's the Morning Zoo with Chris and Spencer in the morning. We're talking about the Poughkeepsie Tapes, the scariest movie of 2007. I gotta check my watch here because this movie has been out for a long time, and we're going to be talking about it and its inspirations and some of the people that inspired it and some other adjacent things that Spencer brought to my attention. We were planning on doing this as a Culture Cast episode, but instead I figured, hey, we do this format on Scary Stories We Tell, and this will allow us to talk more about the real stuff, less the movie, because I've already done an episode on this movie long ago where I interviewed John Eric Dowdle, Drew Dowdle, the directors of the movie, and then Stacy Shabosky, who is the wife of one of the two. I forget which one. I believe John Eric Dowdle. So I spoke to the three of them on an interview if you want to go listen to that. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, on this episode of Scary Stories We Tell, the Poughkeepsie Tapes and the inspiration behind it and some other, again, kind of tangentially related things. So Spencer, I want to know right here at the top, when did you first hear of the Poughkeepsie Tapes and when did you first see it?
Yeah, I think it was about, it was relatively recently for me. I want to say 2018, I think, maybe 2019. I fairly regularly teach a course in horror filmmaking at Northwestern. And for various reasons, after doing it for a while, I just really felt like I needed to contend with the found footage genre of horror. And so I was asking, I don't actually like found footage movies very much, but I was like, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to study this. I'm an academic. I can work my way through. And so I was asking for a lot of recommendations about, the best or the most teachable or the most kind of variety in, found footage horror, back a few years ago. And, it's funny, a really good friend of mine, Kelly Brown, a good friend from college, she recommended the Poughkeepsie Tapes as being, a really good one to check out. She recommended some other good ones to see. And part of what was interesting and remains funny to me about, her recommendation is this is one where I came back to her where I was like, that was really fucked up. That was really horrifying. And she was like, oh, wow, finally I find your limit. Because, normally it goes the other way where I suggest something that's like a little too intense for her. So, she found a thing that is at my limit. And I found that to be very interesting. I mean, I'll say right up front that I've now watched this movie a number of times, both for reference for class and also in preparation to talk about it today. And I don't know that I really like it, but I'm still fascinated by it. And I don't know that this is an interesting thing because, like, for the most part, as someone that really likes horror, I'm not of the camp that if something is quote unquote too scary for me, that's where I don't like something. And I know that that's the case for a lot of people, but this is kind of one of the few where I think it's not necessarily that it's too scary, but it's how it's scary that gets into a territory that I kind of, find a limit. And I'm maybe I don't totally like it because of how it scares me. But I find that to be a fascinating thing about this film. And I think it's really, on the whole, I have some filmmaking critiques of it that I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But conceptually, I think this is a really, really tight, intense film, very, very well executed, on its conceptual level to reach certain kind of scare that I have not exactly experienced with other stuff.
This was kind of, and we talked about this privately, off air after we recorded last time, and we were talking about Poughkeepsie Tapes. And this movie was hard to find for a long time, and that kind of added to what I would say, and I'm sure you would agree again, as a not a student of film, mind you, a professor of film. I am,
but always a student.
Yes. Fair. As a student of film, that, and as I am as well, we know that there is a certain amount of cachet that comes with these kinds of things where it's like, oh my God, have you heard of this film, the Poughkeepsie Tapes? And it's, oh my God, it's the scariest movie I've ever seen. And this movie, like, it was fed into that unintentionally, right? Because MGM didn't know what to do with it. It's never really been made clear why MGM kind of put it on the shelf. Even in the interview when I spoke with the Dowdle brothers, I don't remember them saying there seemed to be any one reason. But I mean, again, that episode took place in 2015. It took another 2 years for this movie to finally come out from that point. And they were surprised that I had even seen it then. Because again, I mean, it was supposed to be released in 2007, doesn't get released. And then a version of it comes up at one point on a streaming service. And that wasn't like 2014. So that was like a year. That was a year before I did my episode. So that was how I watched it, was a torrented version of the movie that was effectively the best version of the movie, or the only version of the movie, best I can tell. I mean, again, I did my episode in a time where the movie existed in the form that I have watched it up until now, having seen the Blu-ray. But it's one of those things where that kind of adds to the, and we're going to talk about another thing, the snuff aspect of this film, because this movie in a lot of ways is a faux snuff film, right?
Right.
It's a found footage movie with true crime elements and then a faux snuff film element, because there are, for those of you that don't know what this is about, I would actually say, and I've never done this for this show, pause here and go watch it if you actually want to have frame of reference for what we're talking about, because there's a lot going on here. And so what this is it's a found footage documentary about a fake serial killer who made tapes of his goings on, be it killing people or weird fetishistic behavior, and then seemingly allowed his footage to be found along with some other things. And we'll talk about the real life inspiration behind those other things. And then they made this is the documentary that they're making about that serial killer. And so the Water Street Butcher, as he's known. But so there's you kind of got to get over this hump first of what this is. And every time I put this on, my wife always asks, is this real? And I always have to be like, no, that's not real. And it's not because, she just forgets, because again, it's so well presented that it's easy to forget. And again, I would like to live in a world where we forget that this is not real, because that makes it work better, because there are parts of this that don't work because it is not real. Namely, all of the talking heads are
not the best performances.
Varying degrees of good and bad, to say the least. But the conceit at the center of this, that there is a real serial killer named the Water Street Butcher whose tape collection has been found, and they have used that footage along with footage of people talking about him, a la all of these shows that you can find documentaries on YouTube and Discovery Plus and Netflix. And this is in 2007, man. Like, that's the thing. Like, this movie came out so ahead of its time. I mean, we talk about other movies that come out ahead of their time that are true crime related. Another one that I stand by is Zodiac. Same fucking thing. But this movie, if it came out now, and again, like, it more or less did come out now. It came out in the thrush of true crime stuff. So it has found its audience, thankfully, and it even came out via Orion Pictures, which I always do appreciate, because it's in that frame of those kinds of films, or at least that expectation, at least the style of that movie. But this is a movie that I'm with you. Is a long answer. I have a hard time getting this movie out of my head.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really something. I mean, it's
given what it fucking is. Yes, it really is, Spencer.
That's a real achievement, because for instance, in comparison to other found footage movies that I might even say that I enjoy more, like for instance, I'll throw out that I'm kind of a fan of The Last Exorcism, but The Last Exorcism is a pretty easy piece of work going down. And the couple of times that I've seen it, like when I've thought about teaching it in a class, or the first time I saw it in the theater, it's ultimately like a kind of fun, clever horror experience that I find to be like really well constructed, but it does not sit with me after as a disturbing thing. It's not in the sort of tier of horror with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, or we could list lots and lots of favorites that like kind of get into your brain afterwards. And
Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Yeah, and I think Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is a really important that's an important film in relationship to this one, because of key use of videotape by the killers at one point in the film. Henry and Otis find a video camera, and they record their murder of a suburban family, and it's the turning point in that film from a movie that's kind of arty and kind of funny into something that's now crossed a line and is morally much more questionable, becomes really, really frightening in that moment. And for some viewers is the point at which, okay, I've had enough. I'm done with this movie. I'm not going to watch any further. And, I've talked to John McNaughton a few different times over the years, and we've talked about that particular beat. And, so in relation to Poughkeepsie Tapes, which I think is drawing on the same kind of feeling that you can get from a videotape object, that is a kind of snuff object. What John said about that moment in Henry was that it was really important to him to break the audience relationship to the killings. That yes, Henry and Otis, based on Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, can be funny. When he talked about the kind of what he called the poetry of stupidity, for them, that there's a side that's funny about how stupid and unimaginative these characters are, and that there's a way in which their killings, however disturbing, can still play as this kind of funny poetry of stupidity, and that he felt it was really important morally for the film to cross a line into seriousness and outrage. And from that point forward in the film, even if things were going to be funny again, they would hit very, very differently for the rest of the movie. And so I think that, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is a really important forebear to this particular film and what they're drawing on. And in a way, they're laying out that much more of this. And now, we can also talk about Cannibal Holocaust. We can talk about Blair Witch Project, of course, both of which I think have really big influences on this film. But I'm going to say perhaps the biggest, I don't know that it was the biggest conscious influence for the Dowdles, but I do think that the biggest influence, or kind of previous text before this one, would be Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, for the way that the video works.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think something else is also very much obviously a source of reference. And I think it's something much less exciting and one might even say boring or trite. But they recreate those mid 2000s talking heads serial killer documentaries really, really, really well in a way that like they were sitting in clearly. And again, again, when I spoke with them, they talk about the amount of material they were keeping in their house related to serial killers, which was not a healthy amount by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, again, given that you have to like throw yourself into this ghoulish, nightmarish shit constantly. But, again, I mean, the other, I mean, there's, the influences here, like you've mentioned, it's just that, I remember watching, it was like an early 2000s documentary or maybe like late 90s about BTK. And this is before he got caught, right? So I remember watching that. So it's like late enough where he's kind of a memory because with BTK, he kind of went underground for a while. He sat in his recliner and was squeezing his little ball in front of the TV like a fucking freak the entire time. Because Dennis Rader just like what a fucking loser. Like, God, dude, like if you want to cross dress, just fucking cross dress. Nobody. I mean, I guess people care. I guess people care now, but or people shouldn't care now. But the problem is, Dennis Rader shouldn't have cared then. Clowning on his stupid ass aside, it's weird to watch something like that where it's removed from when it happened, but yet he still hasn't been caught, and we know he's going to be caught. And yet they're taught. It's like we don't know the BTK killer may be watching this now. It was kind of like that same thing where it didn't do what the movie did, which is very the Tingler, right? I mean, it's like he might be in the theater behind you. It's a lot of that at the end of this movie, and in those documentaries they don't do that because that's not the intention of those. But it is that same thing where it's like he could be watching this now, and like. That kind of thing. And again, like, I don't know if they saw that specific one, but they really capture that late 90s, early 2000s serial killer documentary vibe. And again, maybe that's why the talking heads are so bad. Or maybe they're just bad. I mean, some of them are fine. I think the FBI dudes are fine. I think the one dude who's like, I know 3 of you will be gone I love that speech. I love the amount, like everything about this movie that I love is how hard it leans into your expectations on this kind of stuff. Because again, for as black as this is, because this is pitch black, they do revel in it, right? Like they revel in it, like more or less, which I appreciate. Because reveling in it means you understand what this is. You're not making any bones about what this is. The audience can take it however they're going to take it. And they're going to be a wide spectrum of people with something this polarizing. But they know what they're making here. And they literally incorporate everything but eating corpses. I mean, really, like, they go further than that. Which is the fucking hilarious part. Like when you think of someone like Dahmer and that's the top end of the serial killer spectrum. It's like, no, this guy goes further because nobody in real life is actually like this. Thank God. Like,
right. Yeah. Well, and that's part of that's what they can pull off with fiction that, Thomas Harris, for instance, is so good at is taking, yeah, and this is also self-conscious in this movie because they mention it like this, but that one serial killer is not going to do all these different things for, because one person is not going to do all these different things because the reasons why people are serial killers are very personal. And back to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, frankly, stupid, like at a sub-intellectual kind of, this is what the horrible thing my body is telling me to do is more the vibe with a lot of serial killers. So you do not find
BTK claimed he was possessed by the beast, the demon. Back to BTK.
Exactly. Yeah.
They always claim it's something. I mean, not always. I mean, sometimes they claim it's their neighbor's dog, which is just as much bullshit. But I mean, again, there is often with serial killers a underlying reason that is not easily sussed out.
That's right, and is not a highly intellectualized, sort of reason. I think it's not as if all serial killers are dumb, but they're not the kind of super genius that we get an idea of. And in a way, the super genius is a comforting thought. I know that sounds strange when we're talking about serial killers, but thinking of a serial killer as a super genius is comforting in a way, because that makes sense to us. When it turns out that the serial killer is, a gibbering idiot with like an IQ of about 80, who is, harming themselves as much as anybody else, and it just has these like sort of horrible, physical and psychological urges driving them. There's something like deeply frightening about that when they are not caught for a long time. Like one of the things that's comforting about the super genius is that you can understand how they outwit the cops for a long time. And that is like one of the things going into, this particular version of a serial killer in this movie, is that he outwits the cops for a really long time, because he's very smart and because he changes MO, and he is this protean kind of combo of different kinds of serial killers. But in so many cases, again, back to Henry Lee Lucas, this is someone who was really of very limited intelligence in real life, and was not caught for a long time. And this is the case with a lot of serial killers. That is deeply disturbing because it has a lot to say about our law enforcement, but then it's also harder to understand their motivations. They're not going to be articulate and be able to tell you their motivations. And even in the case of like one of the quote unquote smarter serial killers, like Ted Bundy, by the time he was caught, he was clearly just at the mercy of horrific urges that made him sloppy and made it. He was easy to catch by the cops at the end when he was just on his last kind of rampage in Florida, because he was sloppy, he wasn't thinking, and he really, there was an interview with him years later where they asked, why did you do this? And he blamed pornography, and it was just very clear that he didn't have anything interesting to say. He did not have a reason that he could articulate that why he did what he did, that remained like so impossible to understand to people. He's just getting attention, at the end. He got, fundamentalist Christians to kind of embrace the idea that the porn could turn you into a serial killer by doing this final interview the way that he did. And that's one of your smarter serial killers. So there is a side within this mythology that I guess is kind of, it's funny because this is, as we've talked about, pitch black and extremely disturbing, but there's an artifice to what he is that, yes, is very frightening, but is maybe a little bit. We could the thing that I think is really interesting here is the movie doesn't make it possible to understand him and what he's doing, but it does sort of keep us going with the notion that this is a thoughtful enough killer who's like working out all these points and has this kind of intellectual cat and mouse game going with the cops, that like one of the things pulling us along is that anticipation that there could be an answer at the end of this, that you could talk to this person and he could articulate what he's after. And that it doesn't answer that is then part of the fear factor and the ooga booga of the story that I think is like pretty well worked out.
Well, and that for me, I think, is the thing about it, that ultimately does make it stand out more than other things like this that I've seen, is its refusal to back down on any of this. Like, and that's, again, like, that takes a special kind of filmmakers, really. And I'm not saying that the Dowdles haven't come to this level since. I actually really like the Waco TV series. I think the Waco TV series was really good. I don't know if you know this, there was a sequel series coming out soon. in response to the original series with their producers, and it has Michael Shannon in it replaying his FBI yeah, I didn't even know that's how good of a job Showtime does at advertising things. But I like that they don't back down from saying, like you said, I mean, this guy is so unrealistically smart that he is literally a Batman villain. He is a super villain. Like, this is a super villain to the point where it is more about him interacting with the police and what he's doing to Cheryl. And it's like, it's about him, but it's weird. It's about him, but we never, like you said, I mean, he's there, but he's not there in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And the sort of, opening near the beginning with the footage of him digging up Cheryl's grave, and we don't understand what it means yet. But that coming near the beginning, and then, sorry, spoilers to all of you, you were warned. But I think that this is part of the smart stuff that they do is they present things that you don't understand at the beginning, then they allow you to understand what it is by the end. But understanding what it is doesn't explain anything, does not give you the comfort of saying, the comfort of the ending of Psycho that Hitchcock had to do, which, sort of famously, as he put it, to the screenwriter, Stefano, Hitchcock said, you just saved this movie because it meant the difference, that explanation to sort of put a bow on the end of Psycho, and we can all make fun of it now. That was really necessary in order for the film to get, released under the production code. That kind of comfort of here's what the psychotic killer was really up to. Here's what he thought, and sort of bringing it to this sense of closure, of understanding. Because while the movie isn't presenting any kind of solution to it, it makes it feel like something that the world could control, or that the world can correct for, if we understand it. And this, like some other work, like the Blair Witch Project, the way that ending plays, it's repeating an image that is discussed in relationship to the Blair Witch mythology, but and so we understand that it's part of that mythology, but we don't understand what it's doing or why. And leaving us with these big questions about, the why and the how, really, really make it a particularly frightening, kind of story. And I think this is one level on which it breaks with the true crime documentary frame. The true crime documentary frame is going to have a narrator or one of the people come in and really sum up what does all this mean, even when it's unsolved. Like Unsolved Mysteries, you have Robert Stack kind of come in and he says a few words at the end to put a kind of bow on it. But this is the place where, both with the post credits scene, which is really awful to send you away from the thing at the very end.
It doesn't let up. It doesn't let up.
It doesn't let up. And it actually breaks with its convention in that kind of crime documentary really would grasp at some kind of straw to explain, and it just doesn't.
Yeah, and I do find that bit a little odd, because in my mind, it's the one thing that they don't do. And I feel like they don't do it because they have all the footage of the killer. That's what makes this the better version of those, because it has the thing that those would never have, which is you getting to see what they're talking about. I mean, the thing I will say about the merging of those two mediums is I guess the finalist version of this in a lot of ways. Have you seen the WNUF Halloween special?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it. Tell me more.
So it's a supposed lost Halloween special from a like Northeastern radio or like broadcasting station from like the mid 80s, where a news broadcaster, like a news personality, like a Morton Downey Jr. type, goes into a haunted house with a camera crew. And then I'm not going to spoil it, but let's just say, as one might expect, things don't go the way that you would expect. Similarly to the Morton Downey Jr. episode of Tales from the Crypt, coincidentally. But the thing that makes WNUF Halloween Special interesting is it's presented in the format of a 80s Halloween special, unlike a locally broadcast TV. So the director, Chris LaMartina, created a bunch of had his friends create fake ads that are really tongue in cheek. And it's just, it does the furthest thing that this doesn't do. This doesn't tell us why would you put the footage of the killer doing this into this documentary.
Yeah, no, there are, that's exactly right. There are some breaks from the convention in that, okay, so if you were making this for television, then we really go off the reservation. There would be points at which, yes, it would show some of the tape, but there would be a special warning about this is going to be really terrible. Turn it off if you can't take it. And even then would probably blur things, would cut away at the key moment. But so then this puts us a little bit more in the realm of a theatrical true crime documentary that would be R-rated. So like a Thin Blue Line, kind of thing where you're doing this for a theatrical audience. But even then, the tape that they show goes another step further. And there's one moment in this where I feel like whatever. I don't care about their intention. I also don't really care about enumerating flaws. But I will say that there's a moment where the moral relationship to the material becomes troubled in a way that is unpleasant to the point of being kind of bad for me, where the sound design and music really kicks in during this one home invasion murder, which is really, really disturbing in the film. And the sound design, you feel the filmmakers laying it on a little thicker to make this situation more horrific than it would. Well, I don't know, more horrific, but it's horrific. It is. I think it would actually, part of my reaction is I think it would be actually just as frightening, if not more frightening, to keep playing the tape without extra sound work and putting in these low tones of, now things have gotten very serious and it's very dark indeed as they're about to murder the boyfriend of the girl who he's going to kidnap. That sequence in the sound design goes into this world of a traditional horror film where the address to the audience and our sense of empathy for the characters works differently. And it is this moment that feels like it's going over the line where the filmmakers are kind of, in league with the killer, which, that puts it in some of the territory of Man Bites Dog, which is, a similar kind of serial killer mockumentary, not exactly found footage kind of movie. But, Man Bites Dog is another one that we could, refer to here. And so this particular moment that goes this extra bit farther with the artifice starts to feel really, really gross in terms of filmmaker intentions. But then again, maybe they're implicating themselves, in the whole thing. I don't, I
kind of feel like including your wife in the movie implicates you in the movie.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, sure. It's metatextual, but it always makes me laugh because the three of them were the sweetest people, and I think I'm even still friends with Stacy Shabosky on Facebook. Sweet lady, super nice, but that I feel like is the biggest, like, we're kind of in league with all of this, because again, like, I'm letting my wife be, again, fake, but as much as fake this stuff can be at this point, because she is getting her head dunked in the water. She is, like, again, she's getting fake hit, but she's still tied up. I mean, again, like, she's still having to do all of these things. So I feel like that's maybe the I don't know, that's kind of the ounce of flesh, as it were, of like, if we're going to do this, like, we have to really put ourselves into it and do something that maybe makes us even feel a little uncomfortable, as in including my wife as the slave of the serial killer who takes abuse in the form that, like, again, this frankly is the part of the movie that doesn't go far enough. Because in real life now, we know that there are people that are, like, even more abused than this. Like,
yeah.
In ways that are even worse to talk about, that you don't even want to mention out loud. That's how bad they are.
Yeah, well, and her performance is the best in the film. She and the guy who we mostly hear from off screen, but he also is masked. The serial killer. I think his performance is really amazing. And I think it's amazing because he really sounds, and in the way he carries himself on screen, looks like some dude who you could, meet at any ordinary, like, Midwestern bar, or I guess in this case, upstate New York kind of bar. Very ordinary, like a normcore killer, but who happens to have this mask and is like a supervillain within all this. His performance, I think, is also quite good because of how ordinary it is. But the interview that she gives at the end, and you're hinting at something that I want to get at eventually with a meta level to this whole film, in the way that she's cast, and how her performance is used. She is heartbreaking in that interview at the end, where all she can say is, "What do you want me to say?" And she's sort of broken by the mere notion of freedom to tell her own story at the end of the film. And that is at once really sad. She carries the performance in her whole body. She seems like this real person who's been through something truly awful. And the freeze frame on her at the end of the interview, when they tell you, 2 weeks later, she committed suicide. That freeze frame is indelible and sticks out in my head. Her performance is just incredible in this film. She is the most real, the most fully invested. That turn, for me, I think you're exactly right. It could go so much farther in a way. We know of stories. One of the ones, for instance, that I think was a source for this film, or a model for this particular killer, who had kept this woman captive for so many years. In real life. In real life, it is so much worse than even all the things that they talk about or say that they don't want to talk about in terms of her treatment in this film. But her performance and the way in which she's kind of broken and has gone over to being in love with the killer is really the scariest thing in the movie.
Well, and you mentioned people that have been taken hostage like this. I mean, even just someone like Bob Berdella alone is worse than this. Like, and that's the thing. Like, I appreciate that maybe they do hold back on this, but at the same time, I don't know. Somebody who made something like this now wouldn't. If I were making this now, I wouldn't. Would you? I mean, what would be the point? Are we trying to show what this is for what it is, or are we trying to sugarcoat it? And in a little ways, like, sugarcoating it, I get the point, but I don't know. Like, that is the only part of this movie that kind of feels a little quaint, is the torture of her, only because, again, we know now, like you've mentioned, and even then at the time, like, these kinds of things, just like keeping people hostage or just any of this is just so icky, but it's ickier than this. And again, like, this is we don't see a lot of it. So a lot of it is also implied, obviously, which I do appreciate that they do imply a lot, but they go really far in other aspects of this narrative. And it's the one spot that they do kind of maybe go a half step back. Just a half step. But a half step in this regard is a lot.
Yes. Well, and that's part of the interesting balance of this one. And one of the things that I like about the mockumentary format that has rescued the tapes versus the found footage format of they just kept the camera running for hours and hours, and some, I don't know, shadowy cabal has edited it together by the end. I mean, this is one of my problems with found footage, that they've gotten around, but also that is, I think, very clever for the nature of this kind of thing, which is to leave certain stuff like deliberately off screen. And, that you can only be presented with a certain amount of information that's available. And this killer, while yes, he's left the camera rolling through a lot of really horrific things, he has controlled it in that we're only going to see certain horrific things, and then the mockumentary is only going to show us certain horrific things, which then get things going in our imaginations to feel, even bigger and more horrible. So for instance, this also comes out of the moment of torture porn. And I think in a certain way, this movie is more sort of torture pornographic than like Hostel or Saw. It is really focused on torture for long periods of time. And it is really focused on the emotional effect of the victim. And rather than having, cutting and selection and special effects and all this stuff, it is just a camera dead-eyed watching someone, tortured and gibbering with fear for minutes at a time, which is, really disturbing. I mean,
it's fucked up. Like and yet you and I clearly resonate with it. Which what does that say about me and you? I guess here's what it says about me. What it says about me is I'm willing to go this far if it's in the context of unreality, if it's in the context of fiction. My limits. This is not my limits. I mean, there are things worse than this, and I'm sure we'll delve into that once we get further down the road in this conversation, because I know it will come up, given one of the other things that's adjacent to this is worse than this is, frankly. These are my limits for these are close to, if not my limits for this kind of narrative. Like presented to me as fake because it is fake. This is not real. This may be my limit. And that, I think, is what it says about me is I'm willing, my limits are pretty far, but I'm willing to give them a rather wide berth as long as we're talking about unreality.
Well, right. And it's really playing on, in what it withholds from us, it's really playing on some of the qualities of actual reality as we know it, where we reach limits of understanding. Obviously, I mean, to start going down that dark road, this is clearly a film that is playing on the urban mythology of snuff movies, and the mythology that there are movies out there made by serial killers, which the myth of snuff films is that like there's an overlap with pornography, a kind of pornography that's about watching someone actually get killed for the sake of selling the video or film so that someone can derive sexual pleasure from that. That's the mythology of the snuff film. And there is, there's little to no evidence that such things exist. There's a Finlay movie, from the 1970s that got kind of like used as a bloody shirt in the wars over pornography as an example of a snuff film, and it was very clearly a fake snuff film. So, I mean, if it's a fake, it's not snuff. There's the mythology as represented, like in Joel Schumacher's 8mm. There's then there's the question of like back to Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and this might be the thing that is more likely to exist out in the world. Are there tapes by real serial killers torturing and killing their victims that are sort of traded or seen on a black market or gray market? But there's also there's the attention to the nightly news broadcast where Christine Chubbuck shot herself. And that would not be for the sake of commerce, and that would not be for the sake of not filmed for the sake of somebody sexually getting off on it. But nevertheless, there have now been a couple of movies about Christine Chubbuck and about this particular incident, and there's a lot of online chatter about does the actual tape of her suicide on the air exist? And it seems that it does, but that it has been successfully kept under wraps by the TV station and by her family. Or then there's the example, and this is something I have actually seen. There was the broadcast of a press conference by Bud Dwyer when he shot himself.
Don't do it, Bud. Don't do it, Bud.
Don't.
I saw that shit in college, man.
Same. And
hey, man. Nice shot.
I will say, I saw it. I will say that I deliberately wanted to see it. It was something that at that point in my life, I was interested in seeking out. And then once I saw it, I was like, okay, I've seen that. I never need to seek out such a thing again. It is too horrible. I would not want to represent, I make films and I make violent films. I would not want to represent violence in that kind of way that is, captured for real on that tape. Because it does, this is sort of true transgression. It does go too far. And so, for instance, when Al-Qaeda and ISIS started posting beheading videos and execution videos online as part of, terrorist action, that's the kind of thing that perhaps had I not seen the Bud Dwyer video, I might have said, well, maybe this is something to see because it exists and it's dealing with a real experience in life that, certainly all kinds of people have experienced. And I was like, nope, I've already seen something like this. I have no interest. I don't need to subject myself to it. I will say that the ISIS videos did, just in the still frames that were posted online, go a kind of extra step in horror for me, in that they, frankly, the ISIS people seemed to have aesthetic sensibilities where they were creating interesting compositions and color and
production
design.
Values.
The production values were actually quite high. And that was something that I found deeply disturbing, just to see a still that was not, was not bloody, was not some beheaded body or anything, but just the still of, what they posted in the moments before somebody gets killed. And it's horrifying. But, that said, let's mention that the Monkees movie Head has real footage of an execution in Vietnam at a couple of points in the film. This was going around at the time, and the Monkees movie Head is G-rated. That went out with a G rating, and it's not snuff, but there is a literal death on screen that happens because of the found footage that they used in that movie as part of a larger protest against the Vietnam War. So there's an interesting history of the existence of this work and people's sort of moral relationships to it. But then, this choice to track down something. I mean, I got to say, as a title, the Poughkeepsie Tapes is at once very mild mannered. Poughkeepsie. It's almost funny. It's got a P and a K in it. Like the old. I think it's like a Mel Brooks thing about how to make jokes. You got a P and a K in a word, and it's comedy. So the Poughkeepsie Tapes sounds kind of funny. And yet, the tapes and the idea that this could be, real, really serious horror, it's very well thought out, in the kind of going with the everyday. I mean, even like the Blair Witch Project, which sort of suggests something that is like an art project or a student film project or something, even though it's got witch in the title, is kind of playing down the horror just a little bit, versus say Cannibal Holocaust, which is playing up the horror within the title. But the Poughkeepsie Tapes is really, playing on this sense of it being out of the everyday and out of a place that we would not consider horror, or that we wouldn't write as horror, because the name of the town Poughkeepsie is kind of funny, and they didn't live in Poughkeepsie at the time, so they this is a true choice. They didn't shoot anywhere near Poughkeepsie when they made the film. They didn't live near there. They created this mythology sort of based on some things that had actually happened in that area. But I think that's another interesting and smart choice that these guys have made.
Well, and just to speak to a lot of the points, or to break them down, I think for me to think about, something like the way that this, like you mentioned, it approaches this in such a way where the snuff film aspect of this, I feel like, because I was going to ask you, like, which of the things that you see is the most off-putting? Because that goes to like the snuff film aspect of it, of like, what would be the thing you would not want to see happening to a real person? And like, there's terrible things that happen in this movie, including but not limited to corpses' fingers being clipped off. There's a lot of like corpse kind of mutilation in a lot of like really quick, weird a montage of corpse mutilation, as one might say. But I think the thing that sticks with me the most from this movie, that's the most upsetting for me, is where he just is filming the woman in the back of the cop car. Right? Because he says a line, something to the effect of like, you're probably going to want to be dead for what I'm going to do to you. So it's like, with just that line, but again, it's like, this is, I can't help but chuckle because it's like so fucked up. It's like, you can't help but laugh because that they were sitting there thinking to themselves, like, what is the worst thing that we could do? And in a lot of ways, the movie that is almost like the complementary piece to this one, and one might even say it's like, okay, well, here's the movie about the tapes that they found. Let's talk about the movie of the guy at the center of it. The house that Jack built could just be that could be the movie that he is telling about himself. And this is the movie that they're telling about him, because they're some of the same beats even in that movie. Like, the whole, I'm not like, what if I was a serial killer? Because they have that scene in the house that Jack built and this one doesn't have that. Shockingly, it kind of does in that scene with the woman in the back of the car, but she never says like, oh, well, like, thank God you're not a serial killer or anything. But they do it in the house that Jack built. And it's like that movie and this movie are kind of 1A and 1B. And that's why I understand why people don't like that movie either, because it is the same as this movie. It is presenting this with like I'm not saying that there isn't style in this movie, and you've kind of touched on it already, but the absence of style is the style. They are shooting this as if this is real. And in the house that Jack built, they're trying to tell you you're seeing this, and this is just what this guy is doing. And it's not stylized. It's very realistic in its portrayal. Like, is it a little kind of like, maybe it's a little played up, but not in any more of some of the things that some of these real people actually do. Some of the bullshit the hoops that they go through to make some of this stuff happen. Because we've heard, Dahmer and all kinds of people were doing all kinds of wild things that it's just like, oh, he took a mannequin home. Like, fucking why? Like, what? Like, it's just like, but those things viewed externally don't make any sense. But if you hear the character explaining it to you, it makes perfect sense, which is why, like, this in the house that Jack built, like, I kind of want to go back and rewatch that movie, but I kind of also dread rewatching it because it's like this, but the more fiction. It's like the narrative version of this, really.
Yeah, well, and when you're mentioning one of the most horrifying moments of the film is that abduction where the woman is sitting in the back and the camera the camera only has one angle and just stares at her in the back seat. I think this is like one of the things that they did cinematically that is the most disturbing at various points in the film. It certainly is disturbing to see the killer using the camera and carrying the camera when he gets that couple, or when he gets the little girl near the beginning of all this.
We didn't even mention how fucking terrible that is, but hey, that's a Bundy. That's Bundy. That's like what I actually frankly love about this movie is they go, hey, let's recreate the one real thing that we want to recreate one for one. But let's one up ourselves from then on. Because if you can make it through that scene with the girl, which is again, like, it's terrible, but in the scheme of the movie.
Well, it's just warming up.
Right. Yeah.
It's, what would be one of the worst transgressions for a lot of other films is where this movie's kind of just getting started. And he's hand holding the camera and it's deeply creepy, but there's something about when the camera gets set down or when it's on a tripod, that the movie gets like more horrific. And this is like one of the things that I think is really interesting about this as a found footage horror film, because a lot of found footage horror is sort of predicated on, and this is one reason why I don't like a lot of found footage horror, it's predicated on using a kind of sloppiness and what you can't see in order to get away with, poor special effects, poor acting, poor layout of suspense effects and all these kinds of things. It's all to sort of make it feel more real, because the camera's jiggling and it's not well done and all this stuff. But this is a case
even in the best of those found footage movies, like I would say Cloverfield is probably up there. Like even in those movies, they can't get away from it. They can't. It's like it's so hard to get out of. It's like it's almost impossible to escape the orbit of that. With found footage, it's almost impossible.
Well, and the Dowdles can't quite get away from it, for instance, in their movie Quarantine. So like the same filmmaking team doing found footage again, Quarantine does not have the same level of just really terrifying kind of quality to the idea of footage that has been found or that is like somebody's real experience that they've been through. It is not nearly as chilling as when the camera in this movie sits on a tripod or sits on the floor and watches something horrible happen, and that the quote unquote filmmakers, the documentarians that have put all this together, do not flinch. They do not jump cut. They do not look away for some of these really awful moments. There's one near the end that's like so theatrically heightened, where he's got the mask on top of his head and he's walking on all fours, to come up to this woman. But then at the end, and there's a level where I'm kind of like, okay, that is really gnarly and creepy, but it's heightened in this way that seems almost sort of silly. But then when he appears at the end of it and the camera just does not blink, as he inserts these needles into her neck. No blinking whatsoever. I could even tell you how the special effect is done, but the fact that there's no cutting, no blinking, any of that kind of thing, and that it's just a dead-eyed camera, not even being run by a person anymore. It's just this machine recording something going down, is actually like deeply scary, is much more horrifying than the camera getting knocked around by a monster, is more horrifying than the sort of point of view of the killer, kind of thing. And I find that to be like really fascinating, because these are shots that go on for a long time. Some of them are kind of well composed, others are not. It's a place where the performances could start to fall apart, but where, for me, the performances end up working, because like when this guy in this ridiculous, like long-nosed plague doctor mask is just screaming at this woman who's tied up on the floor, his screaming is small and petty and not impressive. And it's not Hannibal Lecter. It's not even like Henry and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. There's something just, again, back to that kind of fucked up normcore quality. This could be some guy that lives down the street from you, and he's just like kind of out of control, screaming at this woman who he's tied up. It's much more awful. It's awful because of the way it's not mediated, and it doesn't look away, and it doesn't have artifice to it.
So let me ask you something, because I'm curious, because I've been going through in my mind, because this is the kind of thing I would like to make. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would like to make something like this. I would like to make this. So, and I'm thinking here, just thinking to myself as a from one creative type to another. If you were to make this now, how would you make this now?
Oh boy.
Right? Because like that's the thing. Like this kind of thing and this kind of show that I'm doing with this true crime, like this was a thing. It's always been a thing, but it's like more of a thing now. And this movie is good, but it does feel like a little outdated. So if you were making this now for for what we're expecting from serial killer things now or true crime things now, how do you make this now? Do you amp up the gore? Do you make it like what do you do to make this something now that's different from what they were making then, but again, still in that same milieu of like a serial killer mockumentary?
Right. Oh boy. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I actually, this is a case where for sure, I think you still need some makeup effects and stuff, but I don't know that amping the gore is necessarily to the point. The moment that I described just a moment ago, where he's, got this like blank mask on top of his head and he's walking on all fours and looks like some kind of alien in the background. And then ultimately puts these needles into this woman's mouth, and her mouth is taped, and then she starts to spit out blood at the same time as the special effects needles release some blood on her neck. This is actually fairly traditional kind of stuff that, because of the way that it's presented, is like really, really terrifying. I guess like the biggest thing that if one was to revisit this, I don't know that you necessarily have to amp up the effects so much as maybe adapt the wraparound story a little bit to have some of the kind of effects that we're looking for. The sort of post, like you're doing it as visual, so it's not a sound thing, obviously, but the like post true crime podcast sort of mode of address toward the audience, thinking about how journalism has changed over time, and also how the kind of journalistic performance has changed. I think one of the things that's interesting about this movie, and that maybe is less a thing that's objectively bad about the performances in the like wraparound documentary, and is maybe more dated. And I think it's still not great, but But I think like one of the things is this is a documentary done with a lot of voices of authority, trying to speak kind of authoritatively. And this is a thing that's really been broken down by a lot of contemporary practice in true crime, in particular, like Serial, where, yes, Sarah Koenig is a voice of authority. She has a good, sort of presentation for radio. She's very professional and everything, but she's also revealing a lot of like small personal kind of stuff along the way. She's revealing of her place in the storytelling, and how she's a character in the evolving story, and the interactions that she has, for instance, with her research assistant when they go out and about. That sort of changes the game a little bit. And I've started to notice that we get a little bit more of this personalization of the documentarians, in a lot of work that we're seeing now, especially, kind of in the true crime space. But I don't know, this simple thing of the found tapes themselves. I think in a way, if there's any capacity for even kind of amping up the kind of the different kinds of media that you could use. I mean, obviously, people have so many cell phones now that like the glimpses of the killer from somebody's cell phone at a major event. I mean, we've already started to kind of go down that road, mixing in that kind of stuff. In this movie, there's a great bit with a surveillance camera at a gas station where he signs the location where they're going to find the next body to the gas station CCTV camera, and that is a quite creepy and fascinating moment, especially as it's revealed that because he is he is a supervillain serial killer. He's giving the sign. He's signing the location of the body hours before he's even found his victims and killed them. He's like planned it all so well that he can do this kind of signing to the gas station CCTV and know that at some point the cops will find it. That's kind of outrageous, but it is also really spooky, and I think it speaks to how this is something with YouTube, and I guess a point that I want to come back to about the like mechanical dead eye of the camera. You go on YouTube and there's a lot of surveillance cam ghost stuff, a ghost or a chupacabra or a gremlin or something that was captured on like a deer cam.
Analog horror. That's what you're talking about. Which,
yeah.
I mean, again, like I don't think it owes to this, but it in my mind, I think it's very close. Something like Skinamarink is kind of in this weird camp, and Skinamarink shares some DNA with this in terms of the use of, I mean, Skinamarink is more about subliminal space use than this is, but that use of liminal space, the use of liminal space in this movie, there are times where they use it rather well. You mentioned the scene with the needles in the neck, and that's one of them. But there's also, one of the great scenes of this movie, and they have it in some of the stills, is Stacey Shabosky with that mask on, with the camera just in her face. But again, there's stuff going on behind her. And there's things going on behind her that you're not seeing, that you're just hearing the noises. And that speaks to the point that you were talking about, which is what I've been, running through my head for something like this is, you're completely right. The way you would do this now is you would have it where they do have an audio only aspect of it, where it's they really lean on part of it, or to your point, I mean, now that everybody has an iPhone, you have it where the guy just has his camera on him at all times, which is pretty much what we're seeing here. But he's like uploading it somewhere or something to that effect, where you get that same aspect of the back and forth interplay and the ability to see what's going on, but the inability to stop it. Because that's the thing ultimately about this, right? Is the way that this is being presented is there's nothing that anyone can do. A, because he's the super villain, which is ultimately why nobody can do anything, which is, we didn't mention the I think the ultimate super brain, like the universe brain of the character in the Poughkeepsie Tapes, the Edward Carver, which is the best fucking fake name possible.
Oh God, yeah.
Ed Carver, or the Water Street Butcher, is he somehow manages to, he changes his modus operandi to essentially the Green River Killer, where he just starts killing sex workers. And Gary Ridgway didn't pose as a cop, I don't think, but maybe he did. Talk about a guy who's a moron, like an actual moron outwitting the cops. But again, they really draw from that in this aspect of the movie. But you essentially have the killer in this movie killing prostitutes and then planting the DNA of a cop on the prostitutes to the point where this cop goes down for all of it being all of the Water Street Butcher's murders, including the little girl, including Cheryl Dempsey. And then the day he gets executed, because of course he gets executed, even though they're essentially saying, well, he's not going to get executed, but then he does get executed. The day after he gets executed is September 10th, 2001. September 12th, they find out that he's exonerated of the murders 3 days after he's dead. But it all gets forgotten because of 9/11. It's like literally universe brain. It's so hilarious. I mean, again, it's hilarious. Is it not? It's hilarious. Like, I don't know how else to interpret it, but like the amount of bullshit that I just had to describe should strike you as somewhat funny, which you chuckled, so it clearly did. But I'm more speaking to you, dear listener, but it's like so ridiculous. But this guy is like literally universe brain. He is a super villain. And he's like, imagine Moriarty if Moriarty was on some sort of, like consciousness expanding drug that he could control the universe around him. Like, that's what we're talking about here.
Well, and I think that this gets at, something that I think that comes up with a lot of found footage horror, but that I think is leaned into here is the supernatural quality to it. Is that, yes, a serial killer is a natural thing. This is a real person within the fictional universe of the film. But there's also this level of, as you say, that like universe brain that goes beyond into something where, between the kind of dead-eyed machine recording of a reality that it comes from this camera that doesn't even have like a person behind it. Yes, it's controlled by the killer on one level, but on another, once he leaves it there and gets in front of it, there's something grotesque and uncanny about that kind of surveillance cam quality. And then that he can also pull off this like universe brain thing. There is a sort of like much bigger than anything happens that happens in this film. Larger forces at work. That is a kind of like, people talk about Lovecraftian horror a bunch these days, but I do think that this is in that zone of the Lovecraftian, where the horror is like ultimately bigger than what you can comprehend, while giving you just enough to grasp onto to half comprehend it and know how awful it is. This is a kind of Lovecraftian serial killer at the end. And I know I'm being one, pretentious, and two, very much of the moment, but I think that this does truly get into that kind of zone of like what arrives to us as supernatural because it is beyond our understanding, because it's beyond our everyday experience. And the everyday experience that's presented here is just that little bit of evidence, the tip of a much bigger iceberg for reality.
Well, and I wanted to mention this because you had mentioned, the interview that Stacey Shabosky does in the movie as Cheryl, and it's one of the few scenes. I think it's the only scene in the movie that's shot by the filmmakers as the same way the serial killer would shoot her, right? And so in my mind, this draws into what you were just talking about by giving us enough to grasp onto. But again, ultimately understanding that this evil, it lurks in the corner of the room, but you don't understand that corner is gone. And now there's just a void behind it left because this darkness is really that bad. You can't stare it in the eye, because to stare it in the eye is to go mad. And that is what happens to Cheryl Dempsey. Ultimately, at the end of the movie, she dies the way a character in a Lovecraftian horror dies, by, killing herself from madness. Ultimately, and she's driven mad, but at the same time, it also feels like and again, I don't know if this was the intent of it, but this is the way I'm taking it now, because again, with the changing way of presenting these narratives, it would be something that you'd have to be more cognizant of if you wanted to, but ultimately I don't think it matters. In true crime, the way it's presented in these kinds of documentaries, who are the people that always get forgotten are the victims, and their stories are never told. And so it's kind of telling that when they put the camera on Cheryl, whose story has already effectively been told by everybody else but her, she goes, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, I don't know what to say. And it's like, any of these people that are victims of or are family members of victims, what is there left to say anymore? Like, my family member died, or I was tortured by this person. Like, what do you want me to say? What is there to say? And I don't know how intentional that was, but it's pretty metatextual now, given, again, how hard the victims' families and the victims themselves seem to try to have to fight to get remembered. Because again, we now live in a post Dahmer, the TV show, universe where that happened, and they said, well, we didn't talk to whatever. And it's like, great. Like, again, I don't care. It's fucking entertainment. Watch it if you will. It was pretty grotesque in the way that this is pretty grotesque, frankly. Like, and again, like, Dahmer, I can't pretend like they didn't watch this, because that has a similar thing. That was on Netflix. There's no reason that they couldn't show Evan Peters doing some really gross stuff. There's literally nothing holding them back. They are not beholden to anyone. It's a literal streaming show. And yet they didn't show those things. Why? Because there's no way to stylize a dude eating a penis to make that character ever come off as sympathetic. There's A. But B, it's always more, I think, impactful to not show it and let the audience's mind go wild. Because there's a scene in Dahmer where they redo one of the murders, but you don't see it, you hear it, and they play "Please Don't Go," and it's like, okay, you fucking ruined that song that I actually like forever. Thank you very much. But like, you just hear the song, you hear the drill. And like that, and you just hear it, but you're not even hearing it. You're hearing it through the vent that someone else is hearing it. And that is more impactful than showing Evan Peters doing anything. Because again, if you know about Dahmer, so you know what actually happened, so you know what the outcome is, and they don't need to show it. And in a lot of ways, like, this doesn't show everything it could. It shows more than most do, but I appreciate that it takes a stand of like, nope, we want to really give you something that and again, like, they give you something that nobody else has really ever done. Like, all these things that we're talking about, either pre or post this, they are versions of this, but nobody else has done anything remotely close to this since. That is the one thing about this that reminds me of Skinamarink and other things. And this probably is one of the reasons it lodges in my brain. There's nothing else like this. If I want to watch something like this, I either watch this or I go watch The Real Thing.
Right.
Like, those are my options. This, which is fake, or that BTK documentary I was talking about, or so many of other of those documentaries that are for free on YouTube. But again, like, I don't like sitting in the world of the real so long, because it becomes too much. Like, you can sit in the fake world for a lot longer, maybe not forever, but a lot longer. Because again, like, this is ultimately crafted by two people who have a vision. And I think the vision comes through very clear. Is it everybody's cup of tea? No, but I don't expect everybody's cup of tea is going to be, smoked oolong tea that has some sort of weird thing that I get it. Like, not everything is for everybody, but this found an audience, and this resonated with me and you.
Yeah, well, and I think you mentioned a meta level, and this is something I wanted to get back to because I think it speaks to what I respond to, and also bothers me and makes me feel like I got to hold this a little bit at arm's length in terms of because like one of the things that fiction does is fiction isn't just a way of making stuff up. It's the purpose of making things up is to give shape and impart ideas of meaning and aspects of our experience that you can't just capture by straightforwardly representing something. But there is this like meta level that goes on in this fiction where the killer is the killer is very much driven by frightening his victims. That's like the thing that holds together all of his different MOs that he's cobbled together from different serial killers and that help him to keep the police at bay, that they'll never catch up with him. He is determined to frighten his victims in very much the style of like the Golden State Killer, who would, put dishes on the pile up dishes on the back of one of his victims, tied up, and say, if I hear those dishes fall off of you, I'm going to murder you. And then he would murder this person anyway.
And what's crazy to me is like to speak to that. We watched, you and I, you mentioned to me the snuff movie, and you brought up snuff movies once already. And I think it ties into what you're about to get to. Like, we used to, that snuff movie is pretty subversive in and of itself with the things that it presents. Those Leonard Lake and Charles Ng tapes are now being, you can watch a documentary series on that on Peacock. On Peacock, that shows more of those tapes than that did. And I think it's mind-boggling to me, because now we're at a point, I also think, where like people want to the point of like people want to be scared more now. They want to see more of this, like with like the Golden State Killer. Like, people are okay with hearing about all this now. They really didn't used to be.
Right. Well, and within this, the idea of a killing that's done, I mean, the way that the idea ends up being played out, both for scaring the victims and scaring people, terrorizing people, in a larger way, there's that killing where the husband's head is removed and then embedded in his wife's body. And she's woken up to, like, for the purpose of registering this, just moments before then she's going to be murdered. And then her body will be presented. Presented. It's a performance that's being created, like this kind of horrifying work of art, where her body is going to be found with a head inside it, where then the authorities have to discover, oh wait, this is a man's head in a woman's body that's beheaded. And then far, far away, her head and hands are presented, to authorities elsewhere as a kind of, intense, extra frightening kind of thing. And on a certain level, that's also, obviously, this is where it gets really meta. So within the movie, it's meant to frighten authorities. It's meant to frighten the victims in this extreme and utterly horrifying way. But then it is also to frighten us. And I guess, like, one of the things that makes me a little bit uneasy with this film is that while I take away from a movie like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which has, real torture and horror and screaming, and has, its worst scene is the transgressive kind of dinner at the end where Sally is in pain and just screaming, and all the Chainsaw family mock her pain. And ultimately they're planning to kill her, but it's very much frightening. There is a way in which the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as an art object is up to some things that are more purposeful in their scares. This is a kind of movie where I try to latch on to something more purposeful than that. The Dowdles are just trying to scare the shit out of me with this, this story of a serial killer and these tapes. And I'm not sure that there's anything more to it than that. And even as a horror fan, that is extremely uneasy to me, especially given that this is a story about, like in Peeping Tom, a killer who is deliberately being as frightening as possible. And again, Peeping Tom also seems to have this larger sense of what this meta level is about, and questioning cinema and the treatment of women in cinema and all this kind of stuff. The Poughkeepsie Tapes also has just really grotesque level of misogynistic violence, because that's the nature of the killer. And so it's not as if this stuff should be cleaned up for the sake of keeping feminists pleased. It is that there can be, I don't know that within this movie this is the case, and this is part of what I feel uneasy about, but there can be reason for depicting misogynistic violence as a real occurrence. But again, back to this sort of dead-eyed quality of the mechanical device of the camera just recording all this stuff. There's also, right up into the end, a kind of dead-eyed quality to the storytelling where, as I said earlier, I think it's kind of amazing that the killer sort of gets away at the end, and his identity is never discovered. And that the true crime documentary wraparound sort of breaks with convention by not providing any kind of explanation or reason or sort of moral wrap up or whatever. So I admire it on one level, but then there's another level that I'm just left with, what is my purpose for participating in such a foul thing? And I don't know that I have a very good answer, other than a kind of common basic meta commentary on cinematic horror. And I suppose on some level that's enough. And we're having this, we're having a long conversation. We've already talked for longer than the length of the movie about what's going on in this film and its relationship to other kinds of objects. But it does come back to this thing of very much as I am not interested in watching a kind of real death on camera post seeing Bud Dwyer, I have real questions about, why do I watch this? And I know there are other people who have, limits that are, much less intense than my own limits. But I do end up asking that kind of question that I've heard, for instance, from family members about why would you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And I can come back with oh my God, it's this amazing art object and it's so beautiful. And there's a kind of vegetarian commentary and it tells us about America's relationship to the Vietnam War. And there's a whole class element to it. There's all kinds of stuff going on in that. And there's all kinds of stuff going on here. But it's that sense of a larger purpose where I kind of get the void staring back, and I'm not sure why I do this to myself other than going, oh, yeah, it's the most fucked up movie I've ever seen. It's on that YouTube list of the 10 most fucked up movies ever. I've got to see this fucked up thing. I don't know. I don't know that I have a better answer than that. Sorry to rant so long on it, but it really, obviously, it bedevils me a little bit. And that is a power that this very strange film has.
Well, and I was going to say the same thing, because this movie, I don't, it's not that this movie doesn't show up on those lists, but there are cinema things that are worse than this, that I think for other people, and it's not for other people that are worse than this, but the way that those other things are presented as fictional, I mean, there's something like, again, we could go back and forth, like, fucking A and B, C and D, like Serbian film or Salo or, oh my God. I mean, again, like Cannibal Holocaust is on that list for forever. But I'm sure
I'm fascinated with Cannibal Holocaust, and I might never see it again, but I'm really fascinated with it. I genuinely think it's a good film, but I don't know that that's something I need in my life again.
Right. But like the thing is, like, when you talk about those kinds of movies, you're again, like, the point is like what, pushing your limit as a film watcher, but
Right.
Those are all fiction. They all ultimately feel like fiction. What's weird about this is it just, there is, there was that, I don't remember what it was called. It was on Shudder, like Cursed Tapes. Is that what it was called? And it was talking about, or like Cursed Films. And it was talking about, obviously like the easy ones, like the Twilight Zone movie and, other things like that, where they capture things or certain things happen and, unexplained. Like this, I think, is more in line with, like you've mentioned already, a thing that ends up becoming very much a thing like a year or two later on YouTube, where it's just like, this is really like a creepypasta in a lot of ways, right? Like it kind of is. It has that, just because those often have that unsettling quality that you really can't like put your finger on. It just, there's an elusiveness to it. And this is one of those movies that I think about fairly often. I remember, where I live in the Midwest, we're both Midwest livers. There is and I've thought about it. I don't know why I haven't bought it. And now I want to go and buy it. There's a antique store here that has an original poster for the movie.
Oh,
like
interesting.
$15.
Oh, interesting.
It's like an original big, and like, it's like weird to me that like that exists somewhere like I live, because like, why, who else is that for?
Right.
Because again, like that's the thing about this movie. It's weird. Like it speaks to me in a weird way. And again, I feel like it's just, maybe it speaks to me in a way that's like, these kinds of things are just so, it's not that they're not talked about, but they're never talked about like this. And since this is really the only way that anyone's ever talked about this way, it makes it so much more enticing that every time I watch it, I always want there to be more. But there never is, because like, again, there's nothing else like this. Like even with something like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, like there is a sequel to that, but there's not any more of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer the way it is. And it doesn't have that same effect on me, but I'm assuming for you, it similarly does, right? Like it's a similar like feeling of a movie.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer has a much sort of, as gnarly as it is, it has a much clearer kind of moral center,
right?
And a kind of, what it's trying to draw out of the audience. And this one, I don't want to play as if it's only the void staring back, but it is a lot of the void staring back. But that also makes me think of, both the Zodiac Killer for real, that's a model for a killer who changes up MO over the different killings.
Taunts the cops.
The cops.
I mean, this is again, like, that's the thing about this that is fun. It's like, it's what they did, but dialed up to the way that like they only wished they could have done. Like,
that's right.
Right.
That's
like
right.
Zodiac wishes he could have pinned it on somebody else. So he could have been like, and I got away with it too. Like, because Zodiac technically never Zodiac got away with it, but like this, to do what this guy does is like, that's like the purest denouement of all time. Like, and now I'm free. Like,
yeah, well, and I think for instance, what Fincher did with the incidents of the Fincher and Vanderbilt, I think that screenplay deserves a ton of credit in terms of, figuring out what to do, with the Zodiac Killer, and why that film is so, to me, is incredibly fascinating. It's by far, like by a mile, Fincher's best film.
Yes, agreed, man. You speak in my language, brother.
Preach.
Preach, I feel you.
But I think I think actually, like, this is an interesting thing about Zodiac, and maybe the Poughkeepsie Tapes is slightly in this zone. So I think that Zodiac is actually a film about God. I think it's a deeply religious film about a relationship to this, like, larger force that you can't possibly understand and you can't quite grasp, and every time you think you've got it, it kind of falls away. And there's this kind of wrestling with the numinous in that film, and that speaks to the kind of obsession, that the characters have for trying to solve this thing that's unsolvable. And it works a lot like, to get really pretentious here, I'm going to say that movie works a lot like Beckett's Waiting for Godot. That there's a way of using an absurd kind of situation to sort of, wrestle with our relationship to the true enormous quality of the universe that we have only the tiniest understanding of. And perhaps Zodiac is extremely scary, has its own kind of strange, dead-eyed moments to it. One of the things that Zodiac is like a great internet film in a way, because even though the internet is not part of it, one of the things that happens when you watch that film is there's all this research going on and all these documents and trying to uncover the nature of the mystery. And so
they also paint Robert Graysmith as, one might say, the OG armchair detective. I feel
absolutely.
Like. I mean, I don't know if that's entirely deserved, because again, you could get into
their issues.
Robert Graysmith's investigation. I would love to do a Zodiac. We've never done one, but like that, like to say like, oh, you want to do a Zodiac episode, you got to read Graysmith books, and then you got to go read essentially everything else too, because like Graysmith stuff is
problematic.
Yeah, I would say problematic when you pick one person and you go after that person and it's that person and you make everything fit for that person. I'm not saying it wasn't that person, but I don't know if it was that person, but the DNA cleared the person.
Right. Yeah. That. Yes. Well, and I think that's actually one of the things that's better about, I mean, the movie of Zodiac is so much better than the Graysmith book, but
the movie of Zodiac is better than the real life of Zodiac, because the movie more or less is like, it's Arthur Lee Allen, and the real life is like, it's not. So get that out of your head real quick. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Zodiac is not a story about real life. Like, Zodiac's a story about, like, just like the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Poughkeepsie Tapes is about obsession. This guy's obsession was with Cheryl Dempsey. It's a different kind of obsession, but it's an obsession worth killing for, clearly.
Well, and our obsession with this material. And so, while I am not going to compare this to Zodiac on a kind of a qualitative level, because I think Zodiac is a much better film, and I think there's more to dig into in that relationship to the numinous. I do think that this is a film that is tapping into the same kind of, I wouldn't say religious. I'm not sure it quite goes there, but the obsessive and the attempt to understand and the bedeviling the audience with something that is bigger than what they can understand. I think it's related to a film like Zodiac in that way, and so, I got my problems. I come back to, like, why did I watch this? Why have I seen this as many times as I have? Why am I having this long conversation about it? But there is something in this, the, like, wrestling with the true sense of the unknown, and wrestling with the unknown on the basis of actual evidence. I mean, that's the gag. The gag is that you see this, like, mile-long line of tapes, and it's like so many hours, and they talk about how, like, watching all these tapes after a certain point was, like, deeply disturbing and traumatizing and everything. Like, so there's actually, like, all this evidence, and yet there isn't an explanation. There isn't a way of understanding. In the case of the Zodiac killer, there's a lot of evidence, but the evidence does not add up to anybody. And even in the case of, Zodiac, the movie, which sticks with the Graysmith story, I kind of love how it rides this line of like, yep, Arthur Lee Allen, until this like one final title card over Black, which is like, well, they tested Arthur Lee Allen's DNA and it didn't seem to match. So there you go.
Well, and to be fair, the smartest thing that Zodiac does, and it's so smart. And we talked about this privately. The fact that every time Zodiac is in that movie, it's a different actor, which is the movie even then taking itself metatextually as a stand to say, like, again, what it was it the who knows? Who knows? It could have been all the same person, and I think that's more or less the assumption. But again, there are all these suspects, and yet it doesn't add up to anything. So why don't we just have 4 different actors play Zodiac? 4 distinct, one of them, John Lacey, I spoke with when I did that episode so many years ago. But like he and like the other 3 dudes that play Zodiac are all different. He played Zodiac when he picks up Kathleen Johns on the freeway. He's the Zodiac who probably gets the most like dialogue time in the movie. But I don't know. Poughkeepsie Tapes. Yeah, it does. It feels like they captured a little something a little too real, and sometimes movies do that. They poke through to reality and they take a little bit back with them. And like, it's like sometimes when a movie does that, it's just there's nothing about it that is like, you can't replicate that. That just happens. And, when I spoke with the Dowdles, they talked about the amount of research that they were doing and they threw themselves into it and they were looking at photos and reading stories. And again, like when you hear the amount of work that they did and knowing that, it's like they conjured up like a dream demon or something that they like contained within this movie that like good that it stays there and not out in the world. Like, and again, like we have enough darkness in the world that maybe by making something like this, where it is someone too perfect to be caught who could kill you and make it look like your neighbor did it or whatever, like by capturing it on film, maybe they've done humanity a service by hopefully keeping that energy elsewhere and not out in the world.
Yeah, well, and that again
to get really pretentious.
Yeah.
But again, that's the point of this show. That's why I wanted to do our episode here and not on the Culture Cast, because again, these are the kind of conversations that you have about these kind of things that when you watch it, it makes you feel really uncomfortable. I mean, it's like, I know that alien autopsy footage on Fox that they showed in the 90s I know it's fake, man. But every time I watch it, it makes me feel like it is real. Like I'm watching something that it has that quality that just, there's something about it. Maybe it's the quality of the puppets being shitty enough to look good, filmed that low quality. Maybe it's just, I don't know what it is. But ultimately, when I think about something like that, I think about something like this, where it's like you've captured just enough, because that's fake. That's just as fake as this. That's faker than this, frankly, because that pretended to be real and is fake. This never pretended to be real. I guess if you don't understand how movies work, you could assume this is real. But again, I think by 2007 or 2017, people were smart enough to know this is not real. The Dowdles killed their wife. Like, there's none of that. I mean, they didn't go to court like Diodato did for fucking Cannibal Holocaust.
Well, or like, Heather O'Donoghue, she has a fascinating, she now goes by another name that I'm not remembering offhand, but who's, Heather in the Blair Witch Project. She really, she had a career at once launched and totally ruined by the same film because of the like weird sort of magical power of the fiction getting into people's heads as a thing that was sort of more real, even once it was revealed. Because like Poughkeepsie Tapes has a similar kind of origin story in a way to the Blair Witch Project, and that the Blair Witch Project was being passed around as a videotape of a real thing for a certain amount of time before it was put into theaters. Like, there wasn't as much reporting that was getting to ordinary people about like the Sundance Film Festival and stuff in '99. I know that seems impossible, but it was like really, film heads that were paying attention. But, folks like my brother who came across a tape of the Blair Witch Project and saw it well before it came out in theaters and had questions. He asked me, is this for real or what? And I was like, no, it played at Sundance, and I know people involved in making it and putting it out in the world. It's definitely fake, but it's a really interesting kind of film. Similarly, the Poughkeepsie Tapes, because of the distributor fumbling the ball for a while, had this like shadow existence that made it more real. And this does get into, we're on your weird, scary show, but this gets into how artworks can function. And I'm going to preface this and say I am not terribly woo-woo. This is more of a psychological and kind of mass psychological effect, but they do function. There are works of art that function as kind of magical workings. They cause people to think and feel differently. They bring out a sense of, the numinous, or they make people notice all manner of, coincidences and things in their lives. That there are factors that sort of are that become imbued with magic, psychologically. And on the one hand, I'm sort of backing off and getting materialist here and putting it on psychology. But on the other, I do want to emphasize that we still do not understand the nature of consciousness. There's so much we don't understand about how the mind works. So when I'm referring to this kind of psychological effect that I could bring down to like what's for real about the magic here, that it's in people's minds, that is still enormous. Like what's in our minds is huge. And to just kind of play armchair scientist or psychiatrist and do the skepticism game of like, oh, that's just what's in people's minds. It's kind of like, yeah, that's just what's in people's minds, which is enormous and is in so many ways our reality. So I think the kind of mass psychological effect that movies like this have, to go back to your point earlier, that there is almost like a capturing of an egregore, if you want to go to another level of like pretentious, like magical talk here, sort of capturing an egregore or, whatever within a movie. I do think that I think that there's at least like a psychological and mass psychological part of that is true, that we all put a lot of mental energy into these things, and we don't truly understand the degree to which we are at once connected and disconnected to other people's consciousness. So, these works of art can do pretty remarkable things. And I guess I would consider the Poughkeepsie Tapes a more sort of evil or malefic kind of work of art. But nevertheless, that can be an important thing to come in contact with. And I guess then just maybe to start wrapping up, I do want to ask you what your take is on why do we have creepypasta and urban legends about snuff that go back so far. I mean, there are urban legends and theories about like the Black Dahlia killer having made a snuff film of her death, so there's like sort of famous legends of that kind. But like, why are we attracted to this idea of snuff? Because I think it goes beyond anyone who is sort of sick and disturbed enough to genuinely want to receive sexual gratification from watching somebody die. What is it in our desires that sort of brings that out? Why are we attracted to this kind of thing, even to then, as I told a story about watching the Bud Dwyer tape, to ultimately reject it? Why is it something you're interested in?
Well, and that's, again, because I think that is a massive component of this movie. Because again, so much of this is if you were to take it out of the context of this film and just present it to someone, like that scene where that woman is in the back of his car, like, again, like if you present that to someone without the trappings of this and tell them, like, I found this is real, would people watch it? Would people watch it and be like, is that real? Like, did I just watch somebody like, and I don't know if people would even be into it or be interested by it, but if you frame it in such a way where it's behind glass, you can't touch it, it can't get to you. Like, again, like, to put a good example for something that is at times both terrifying in its presentation, but ultimately bullshit. Zach Bagans has a haunted museum in Las Vegas.
Oh, yes. I want to go.
I've been twice. I've been two times. A friend of mine used to work there, actually, as the head tour guide. I went, and they have all kinds of stuff. They have wood from Natalie Wood's boat. They've got all kinds of stuff. They have speaking to real life things of people in harrowing situations. They have Polaroids that Bob Berdella took of his victims while he was keeping them captive. They have the actual ones there that you can like see of like real people in in the throes of death or in the last moments of their life or mid being tortured. But those are all real things. The fake thing that they have, that's essentially been more or less said fake by the person who created it. All this pomp and circumstance, you can forego the room and go around it. You don't have to participate in this experience. You have to go and see the museum if you want to see the Dybbuk box. Because the Dybbuk box is there, right? And the Dybbuk box is fake, right? Like there have been plenty of articles written online all about it. The guy who created the Dybbuk box, his name escapes me. He said something to the effect of, if the Dybbuk box is real, I'll get it tattooed on my forehead that it's real. He was so confident in the fact that he had created the story, and then it had more or less proliferated more and more to the point where a movie is being made, yada, yada, yada. Fine. All of that. But Bagans presents it as real. But he presents it as real, and he builds it up to the point where you are terrified before you walk into the room. And then you walk into the room, and the room is, as best I could explain it, it's like being in the middle of a bombing in World War II in like a bombed out building, but it's not like you're hearing bombs going off loudly, but they're like weird, creepy noises. And then the Dybbuk box is in the center on a pedestal, and it's in a box, and it's surrounded by a ring of salt. And they say, when we originally put the salt around it, it was in a straight line, and look, the salt it's moved. Definitely not in like an area that gets tremors or anything, being near California. But hey, don't talk about that in front of people. And look, I believe in all this shit implicitly. Like I want to believe. I'm like Fox Mulder, and I think so many of us are. But I equate the Poughkeepsie tapes to a real life Dybbuk box because ultimately I think people are drawn to the horrifying. And I think that people want to see snuff films, and you can, and then again, like you can, like, it's not like we said before, like snuff films don't exist, but they do. Because Bud Dwyer is a good one.
The Kennedy Super 8, the Zapruder
the Zapruder film is like
snuff.
It's the snuff film of snuff films, right? Like the Challenger film is a snuff film if you want to get technical. And how many people saw that or have seen The Image? I mean, that's, I think for a certain generation or certain generations with an S, that's etched in a public consciousness. Just like for me, I mean, I grew up with conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the Zapruder film. It's, I mean, again, like it's a man having his head blown off, for fuck's sake. Like, is it HD quality? No. And if it were, nobody would do what they've done. Like it has the same problem the Patterson Gimlin film does, which is if it were in high definition, I think we would all know what's going on, i.e. that it's a real Bigfoot, because I #believe. But in
you believe in the Patterson Gimlin?
Yes.
Oh,
I
nice.
I do.
Interesting. Yeah.
Are you going to sell me some swamp land in Florida?
I'm not going to sell you anything. It's just like, that's actually an example of one of those things I love and I want to believe. but I've now also come across.
I thought you thought I was like a sucker. That's what I was getting.
No. Well, whatever. But,
hey, suckers born every day. I mean, hey, I get it. Like,
yeah. No, but that's actually a really interesting example, because I have read enough stories about, I'm forgetting whether it was Patterson or Gimlin, who died, and like deathbed confessions,
right,
kind of stuff, and the
I believe
sort of
that's
controversy.
Patterson.
Yeah, and I think
Gimlin's still kicking around,
and he believes. And when he's been presented with, you were tricked, he just will not. He won't go there. He
Spencer,
won't believe
two words: Bigfoot breasts. That's all I'm saying. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Bigfoot breasts. That's the key here to belief, is believing that thing has breasts. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no,
it's the best Bigfoot footage around. I mean, if you're talking
for sure.
But again, like in a lot of ways, like, to talk about snuff films, and like the fucking Zapruder film, like it's the best snuff film out there because it's the one everybody's seen. I guess you could call 9/11 any of that footage snuff films too. Like, fucking watch a plane hit a building, like,
yeah.
Or people jump, like all of that's terrible. Like, that's all. Like, why do you need to watch one person dying when you've seen that? Like, again, for a certain generation of people, 9/11 is etched in their consciousness. Thankfully, there are plenty of children and teenagers, and I guess probably at this point adults, that weren't alive, that didn't see it, that don't have the visions of that shit like I do, like you do, it actually happening. So I don't know, but again, like there are all the 9/11 documentaries show all that footage. It's not like they're not showing it and it's just black screens with voiceovers. They still show all of it. So again, like it speaks to something like this, and it's kind of ironic that they mention 9/11 in this, because of all the tapes and tapes and tapes and tapes and tapes of stuff that we actually have of real people dying, 9/11 is it, like in real life. Like nothing may ever hope to fucking God nothing ever comes close. But again, it's that, I don't know, but they, like I said, even in 9/11 documentaries, they're always showing the planes hitting the buildings. And like at this point, it just feels like theater, but you've got to remember those are real people in real buildings in real planes that it really happened to. And like, that's why I would rather watch stuff like this, which isn't real, that I can feel safe because it's behind glass, but it is a painting. It's not a picture of, a Cambodian or a Vietnamese being shot in the head or a monk lighting himself on fire. It's not that, but it's as close as I can get. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is, it's a lot of kids watch Faces of Death.
I watched Faces of Death in college.
Yeah,
it's fine. I mean, it's fine.
It's fine. No, and we now know that most of it is fake. But the desire that there is a sort of need that we have to contend with death, that in a case of something like this, it gets really, really tricky, because it's like, oh, that's all there is. And then there are also, questions of, I mean, in terms of the plot of this movie, you're dealing with a really horrifying and bottomless level of misogyny in the world that is being depicted and put into this, and that corresponds absolutely with so many real life cases of serial killers that it's, I'm not sure what interest is served exactly by saying that that's something that should be avoided in telling these stories. But it also then really raises extremely serious questions about, why would we watch this? But I think that there are these levels of needing to contend with, to get pretentious again, to go down the Jungian kind of path, contend with the shadow in art.
By all means, this is the podcast where you can get pretentious and nobody cares. Like,
okay, good. Well,
this is that's what we're talking. We're talking about highbrow. I mean, it's not that we're not saying highbrow and culture cast, but this is higher level stuff. This is higher plane stuff.
Right. So yeah, we have these needs to contend with, the ultimate reality for us. We all didn't exist at a time that we can't remember. We cannot remember our own non-existence, but we know that there's that coming down the pike. We are not going to exist all over again. We are going to be snuffed out at some point. And what happens next after that is a mystery. But it's just as much a mystery to think about, like, oh, where was I before I was born? And I don't want to get down into like political questions that are really horrible. I'm talking about the more philosophical, like, we all have to confront this like fact, and how we do it is a big question. Yeah. And I guess that's what keeps us kind of coming back to this stuff.
That's what art
contending
is, right?
with it on different levels. What's that?
That's what art is.
Yeah,
I mean, art.
exactly.
I mean, art allows us to experience what it is like.
We can die without dying.
Right. We can experience firsthand what it would be like to be a serial killer. I mean, honestly,
Right.
Is that not what this movie? The promise of this movie is that you get to be a serial killer. And
Right.
that the movie executes on that. And if you don't say that out loud, then you're not saying the quiet part out loud with this. But that's what this is.
Well, and there are real questions about how and why that can be an important thing to go through. And those questions are very real, but it's also the experience and the need to contend with it is very real. Like, do I want to just say, oh, it's always okay to engage with this kind of stuff when we know that we know of cases where it wasn't even like, snuff adjacent or horror, but like, a guy read Catcher in the Rye and decided to murder John Lennon. So, art isn't just let off the hook. We're not let off the hook for our relationship to art, but, certainly art like this is a much safer way of contending with death and contending with the reality of people who deal death to us than going through the actual thing.
Right. I mean, there's no surprise as to why they redid the Elijah Wood Maniac in first person. Because again, like the people won't say it out loud, but there clearly is a want and there clearly is a need to push that further than you would want to go in real life, or way further than you would want to go in real life. But ultimately doing it in a quote safe, a not interactive, but safe, quote unquote way. So yeah, again, that's what art is. That's what art, again, for everybody should hopefully skew more towards than taking it as fact or anything else. It's a way to have a conversation about things that you ultimately can't have a conversation about maybe any other way, or maybe not as interesting any other way. Because some of the things they talk about in movies, like, that would be a pretty pedestrian conversation to have. But the movie the movie is entertaining in what it does and how it presents it.
Yeah.
And yeah, but this is rough. This is not a movie for everybody. You're not trotting this one out to show to your family on a fucking weekend. So you keep it in the back pocket for certain people. And there are people that that would like it. And I've made that suggestion, as I'm sure you have. And it's always interesting to see who it resonates with and who it doesn't. Because that's something like this. It's its own weird thing that's captured its own weird thing. So
yeah. Oh man. Well, I guess
where can people find you on the internet, Spencer, when you're not here joining me talking about weird stuff? Maybe a better avenue for conversations in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess for right now, I'm still on that sinking ship of Twitter at Spencer_Parsons. I teach at Northwestern University, and you can probably find my email on that website if one should be so inclined or deranged to reach out.
By talking about this and you talk about deranged, Jesus, dude, just asking for it. Just come on down and find me. You know where I am.
I'm watching the most horrible shit you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, right? Jesus Christ.
I need to see viscera splayed across the screen.
Right? God, Jesus. As for me, you can find me at weirdingwaymedia.com, where you can find this show and so many other shows. As for this show, Big thanks as always to Maggie Dion and Dustin Rutledge for the album artwork for the show and for the music. Our good friend Alex Malnack over at Blondo. You can find him on Spotify or kicking around the Midwest if you go out to shows at bars and drink. Hey, he might be playing at a city near you. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me as always. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. It's been fun talking about this not exactly fun or precisely entertaining movie.
No, probably. Probably wouldn't use those words to define it either. But we had a fun conversation. So on that
Yes.
note, we'll let our good friend, the former host of Sightings, Mr. Tim White, lead us out.
No mystery is closed to an open mind.